Good evening, everyone. Over the course of the past week, I've sort of been struggling with two different topics or two different themes for today's homily. I started one at the beginning of the week, changed my mind a little bit earlier today. Finally, before the 6 p.m. Mass, I decided that I thought I was going to be able to take the two topics and meld them together in one homily. And the two topics sort of center around two of the main passages from today's gospel. The first one we're going to look at is that last part of the gospel where Jesus very clearly says, if your hand causes you to sin, if your foot causes you to sin, or your eye causes you to sin, get rid of it. Cut it off. Pluck it out. It is better for you to go to heaven missing that body part than to hell with your whole body. What Jesus is talking about is the teaching on avoiding the near occasion of sin. Now, he's not being literal here that he really wants you to pull your eyeball out or cut one of your appendages off. No, he's talking about things that lay outside of us, things that tempt us, things that lead us to sin. To get rid of them so that we do not, or we have less of a chance of falling into sin. This is an essential teaching, and one over the course of my 5 years here, I have repeated over and over and over again, particularly in the confessional, and particularly when it comes to sins dealing with sex. Primarily pornography. Secondarily, the other sin is premarital sex or fornication. Over and over and over again, people come and confess it, and I know we're weak, and I know there's temptation. But people come and say, Father, I'm going to pray an extra Hail Mary. Or I'm going to put a picture of the Blessed Virgin Mary next to my computer. Or I'm going to put like a crucifix above my girlfriend's bed, and that's going to stop us from doing it. No, it's not. No, it's not. I'm not saying that you shouldn't pray, but the fact is, temptation is strong. If we're really serious about avoiding sin and not falling into it, we're going to avoid the situation completely. That means don't be alone with your boyfriend or girlfriend. The things that you like to do in private, you're not going to do in Jordan Park. Or if you do, you're going to get arrested. Pornography. Get rid of the internet on your phone. Put covenant eyes on your computer. Do something. Avoid the near occasion of sin. Because then when the temptation comes, you're going to be less likely to fall. Because the temptation is not necessarily going to go away. But what I've found is so many people, young people in particular, they know it's wrong. Father, I don't want to look at porn anymore. Father, I don't want to fornicate with my boyfriend or girlfriend. They know it's wrong and they don't want to do it. But for some reason, they can't get the strength or the will or the determination, the grace to avoid the near occasion of sin. Because that's the easiest part. But they can't do it. And I've often wondered why. Why is that so difficult? I think the main reason is probably because we're attached to our sin. It's like the alcoholic who knows he shouldn't be drinking so much. He knows what it's doing to his life, but he can't get rid of it because he's attached to the sin. We're attached to our sin, and we don't want to get rid of it. And I've talked before, and just a few weeks ago, we could take the negative route and say this is sin and we should avoid it, or we could take the positive route, particularly with sins against the sixth commandment. The positive route is desiring chastity as a good, to see the value that comes from loving another chastely and being loved in a chaste way. It's a tremendous grace. But even then, I find that maybe it is too idealistic for a lot of people to be able to give them the push they need to begin avoiding the near occasion of sin. And so that's where we're going to pass to the second part of today's homily. I can't say that I'm going to give the cure-all for this, but I think in this insight, there's something that can maybe spur us on to take the necessary action to live more pure lives. Yeah, we all know that Pope Francis has been here over the course of the past week. He's been all over the news media and the talks and the homilies he's given. Some beautiful stuff. And I would be sort of remiss not to mention or talk about Pope Francis today. And he talks a lot about the normal themes he talks about caring for the poor, the environment, respect for the family, respect for human life. But during his talk to the United Nations, there was one little phrase there that stood out to me. And that's what I want to talk about today and connect it to the gospel. It's about a theme that most of us, at least in the United States, don't hear very much about as Catholics. In my priesthood, I've only preached on it once. But it's something that our Holy Fathers talked about a lot, particularly at the beginning of this year for the World Day of Peace. And so I'm going to give you the quote, and I'll try my best to put it into context. The Holy Father is speaking to the United Nations, and he's talking about how world leaders ought to work diligently and make very concrete plans to put aside and to get rid of this economic exclusion, he calls it, where certain economic systems exclude others from development and sharing in the wealth. Because when that happens, he says, there's some pretty serious consequences. And this is what he goes on to list as the consequences. Quote, human trafficking, the marketing of human organs and tissues, the sexual exploitation of boys and girls, slave labor, including prostitution, the drug and weapons trade, terrorism, and international organized crime, unquote. Specifically, he's talking about human trafficking. Human trafficking, basically human slavery, where individuals, most often young women and young men, who because they are forced or they are duped, are sold into slavery and sort of move beyond national and international boundaries. Many of them refugees, many of them unaware that they are being sold into the situation. And as a result, they're there trapped, sometimes as slaves in work camps or in these large factories, sometimes in homes. But the one that we probably hear the most about or familiar with is sex slavery. These young girls and boys sold into prostitution, not choosing it themselves, but leading miserable lives, horrible lives. All pushed forward by often drug traffickers, organized crime, the type of people Jesus is talking about today. The ones who take the little ones, the innocent and the youthful, and deceive them and lead them into this lifestyle. Better they had a millstone tied around their neck and dumped into an ocean for doing what they've done to young people. We don't hear about it a lot, but it's something that is a problem around the world. In fact, I just learned that in Baton Rouge is one of the central hubs right in our backyard for human trafficking in the United States. But so often we're oblivious about it. And the Holy Father has tried to call us to pay more attention. The truth is, I really didn't know much about it until about 6 or 7 years ago. A friend of mine who works with international organizations to try to stop human trafficking, to be able to help young men and women who are caught into this lifestyle, refugees, illegal aliens, people who have been trafficked across borders, to help them get out of that lifestyle. She says, we're never going to know exactly how many people per year are trafficked. The estimate might be 2 to 3 million people. So many more just living in that lifestyle. And it's often hidden in the poor areas of the nation, the poor areas of the city. And the stories she told me were startling. I am not usually shocked. Was shocked about the reality of human trafficking and sex slavery, in particular in our world. So she suggested a book, and I read it. It's one of the best nonfiction books I've ever read. Very, very disturbing read, called A Crime So Monstrous. And it's by a guy named E. Benjamin Skinner, who is a writer, a journalist for a large paper. And he decided to go undercover at different locations around the world to sort of really investigate, to see the reality of slavery in India and in Haiti. And the part I want to talk about today is in Romania, in sort of Eastern Europe. So much sex slavery and young women sold into prostitution. And I read the story and I read the book. There was one part that particularly struck me. I'm actually going to read the paragraph to you. He goes into Bucharest and he's looking to buy a woman, to buy a girl. And he goes in and he begins sort of negotiating with the pimp. The pimp says, no, I'm not going to sell a woman to you outright. But finally, they're willing to be able to negotiate for 2 or 3 months. And they bring out this young woman. And listen to this description. When I read it, it still sticks with me today. He said she had bleached, rust-colored hair. Her head was shrunken. Her nose flattened against her face. Mascara ran from pools of tears around her deep-set eyes, cast downward at her bare feet with widely spread toes. Her hastily applied makeup could not conceal the evidence of Down syndrome. Lipstick was smeared beyond the boundaries of her parted mouth. Her flesh rolled out of the tight yellow tank top and shorts. Her captor held her left arm so tightly as to hunch her shoulder. Below her right bicep were no less than 10 deep, angry red slashes raised, some freshly scabbed. This is a woman who didn't choose this lifestyle, but was trafficked. Down's syndrome. It goes on to say that she was on average raped 20 times a night. They ended up being willing to sell her for a used European car for 3 months. Of course, he didn't buy her, but it gives the point that this exists. This type of terrible stuff. Millions of people throughout the world, and we don't see it. But yet lives, young people's existences snuffed out. I encourage you to read this book and to go online and learn more about trafficking. And how terrible it is and what we can do to put a dent into it. But how does this topic, the topic of human trafficking, of the punishment that the people who perpetrate this deserve, even though the Lord is merciful, how does it tie in to our unwillingness to avoid the near occasion of sin? I'm not trying to say that when we give in to these sins that somehow we are responsible for this. I'm not saying that at all. Although there is a connection between the pornography industry and sex trade and sex trafficking. There is. Or am I saying that if we don't do this, that all of a sudden these evils are going to go away? But what I want to encourage us all to do when we're tempted to look at that porn, when we're tempted to go and fornicate with our boyfriend or girlfriend, I want you to think of the reality of the people who have no choice to say no. Those who are trafficked. Those who are sold into prostitution. A Down syndrome girl who's raped 20 times a night. By men who care nothing about her. To make the choice to say, if not for my own sake, or if not for the purity of my girlfriend, I'm going to abstain. I'm going to avoid the near occasion of sin so I can be in solidarity with these people whose lives are living hell. You may not be able to rescue them. You may not be able to change the hearts of their captors, but you can be in solidarity with the people who don't have the freedom to say no. To say no. And hopefully, gradually, that might begin to change our hearts. Particularly if we decide to start doing research on this. The reality of human trafficking, and maybe get involved. Some people may move so much that they get into law to help work to enact laws to be able to put a stop to this. But the fact is, even though we may not be doing it, the more we contribute to our sex-crazed society, the more we create that environment that allows stuff like this to continue to grow and metastasize in our culture. So let's think about it. The next time that we're tempted, regardless of what temptation is against the sixth commandment, to think about the victims of human trafficking. And to say, no, in solidarity with these people, I'm going to resist. I'm going to resist. And to take action, to pray, to do what we can to promote the gift of the human life and the gift of human sexuality, and to stand as a witness for those who have no choice. Amen.